Okay, so the notion is that the board comes together, governs itself in terms of its planning responsibilities and its oversight responsibilities, and then leaves management to implement and direct the operational stuff, right? So the board may know that we need after school care, because we all are, as a community, know that that's a critical issue. And rather than say what kind of after school care we need, we would just say we want these outcomes for that after school care. We want it to have an impact on community violence or literacy or whatever those impacts are. So if you look at that results-based accountability model, it's those upper level things. And then it's up to staff to do the research on what kinds of after school programming accomplish those ends. And they must do that in ways that don't offend the values of the board. So the biggest policies things, the initial policies are things like thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not embezzle the funds, thou shalt not give yourself a raise as CEO without some other process. So it's really about high level values and high level expectations. And so then the board policies are set up of what's the process that the board uses, how does it delegate those management responsibilities to the CEO, and then what isn't the CEO allowed to do in very important areas to the board. And for most organizations, what isn't the board, the executive director or CEO not allowed to do is usually things that you're required to have compliance plans, have risk management assessments, have quality improvement processes, have a budget, it's all of those things that we all are familiar with. But in a Carver model, they're framed as a negative. So I was not allowed to provide salaries without a pay plan. I was not allowed to expend more money than you took in. Those kinds of things. We had to have certain kinds of competitive procurement. I couldn't just award a bid without seeking competitive procurement strategies. So those kinds of things. And so that's why it's accomplished this way. And then the last chapter is something called ends, which is those things you're trying to do, those impacts you're trying to have. And Meridian's board long ago decided that its ends policies were identical to its strategic plan as updated every year. And so then de facto that became how I got evaluated. My evaluation was based on the implementation of that strategic plan and its objectives.
Has Bob received this document, Ashley?
Yes.
Okay. Bob, you can hear us, right?
Yeah, he's muted.
Yes, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great, thank you.
So that's how these policies are laid out, and that's why that whole executive limitations chapter reads so weirdly.
Well, it sounds like based on what you just said, we've already got some of that incorporated in the policies that we have.
Right, so the question is what's missing
Right.
that we, that is needed, and I just sent Colin the whole kit and caboodle, not intending for him obviously to use any of it necessarily, and these were not, it's not unique to me. I had a whole series of templates that I used too, so it was not like, I figured I did a lot of research on board policy writing, and so why reinvent that wheel?
So what I did is a few months ago, I bought all the Carver books and read them. I said, oh, this will never work.
It's really, I don't think you can do it. It's really hard.
Because usually in government, it's everything is what you can do. So unless it says you can do it, you can't. Not the other way around.
Right, and this specifically says, unless the board has said I can't, I could.
Yeah. So I think we covered this last time. I think Bob was basically in agreement. So what I did is I figured, well, to know if we need these or not, I should at least read them and comment. So those are my comments.
Yeah, and I think the governance process and the board management and delegation ones are not written in that weird way. Those are the ways that they are sort of prescriptive around how the board governs itself and how the board delegates authority. Where they're weird and hard to even remotely think about is the executive limitation ones, unless you flip them and say Colin must, the CEO must, as opposed to must not. They're written in the double negative, which is really weird.
So I'll just tell you, just so you can get an idea of what I did. I'll take you through, and then we can just talk about one. So what I did first is I just, like I said, well, I better read these. And so some of the things we did when I was at the city of Jacksonville, and we redid our organization from scratch. And we kind of went through the same thing. I just remember the attorney saying, well, you don't want to, some policies you don't need or can't really change because it's already in the statute or the ordinance or something. So when it got into, for example, the purpose of the board, the question I asked, and this is more, Bob doesn't have the answer now if he doesn't have the answer, but the question I wrote was, isn't the purpose of the board covered in statute and ordinance? I mean, is there anything we even can say about it?
I think it probably is.
Yeah. But the mission, vision, and guiding principles are something that exists and documented somewhere, but that might be okay to put in as a policy. Here's our mission, vision,
and
principles.
Like that, all of our purpose stuff came from the articles of incorporation and bylaws. So, so it was, again, same derivative of.
Now, roles of the board, I was uncertain. Again, I thought maybe the role of the board is implied in the statute. And some of the stuff is covered somewhere else, right? So annually publish a report to the community. Well, we're required to do that in statute already, so I wouldn't put that in there.
So you're saying if it's in statute, you don't need it as a policy?
Well, no, we can put it as a policy, but I'm saying
It's determined.
Yeah, it's predetermined, and yeah.
yes, which doesn't mean you can't put it in policy, because the advantage of policy is it puts everything in one place. But I think in my outline, and I left my notebook at home by mistake, but if you look at the schedule of things to go through, one of them was external reporting was one of the policies. So I would just put it there. All the external reporting required to do. Can someone pull that up? Can I see your notebook, Mr. Chair? Your notebook. Mr. Vice Chair.
This could get very confusing.
Man on the tractor. Let's see. Yeah, so
Yeah, that was quick, I have to say.
I guess I don't have an external reporting. Well, I'm gonna add that.
Okay.
A separate policy thing on external. No, we can put them there. It's sometimes good to put them there, but
I just think if you're orienting new members who don't necessarily haven't necessarily read the whole statute, the more you can kind of compile those in those pieces of information and say, we govern ourselves according to statute, and therefore here's here's what we have to do.
Yeah, my point is we couldn't say anything inconsistent with the statute.
Exactly.
That's what I meant to say.
Yeah.
So on the role of the role of the on the role of the board, I'd like some feedback from Bob on what in here we could say or not say, or if there's things we just don't agree with this board should be doing.
It says promote the organization to community networking and other agreed methods. Really, that goes to what Maggie was saying earlier about, you know, that's, we promote it as if something comes up. And that-
Yeah, like you going to the
Mhm.
county commission,
Do something.
right? You go to a county commission meeting, or we show up at an event because we want to have,
Otherwise, staff does most
Right.
of the promotion.
right?
Mhm. So I think this one, I would just, that particular one, I would run by Bob and say, is there anything we don't want in here? That would conflict with the statute or something like that. Board member responsibilities, again, I have the same question. Is there anything that conflicts with the statute? I've highlighted 3 or 4, just as questions for me. Number 3, development of governance policies, you mean like what we're doing right now?
Right.
Okay, right. So I think promote the organization to the community, be accountable to funders and accrediting bodies. So ultimately, we're accountable to the taxpayers. It seems like we should say that somewhere in here. This must be a difference between Meridian. So I think maybe be accountable to the taxpayers. Maybe just change it to taxpayers.
Mhm.
Well, actually, we are ultimately accountable to the organizations and what have you as well.
Okay, so how would you change number 6 then? You just speaking specifically about number 6 under board member responsibilities? I'll just write down what you said. Because I just think of funders and accredited bodies of taxpayers.
That, we can work with it and more.
Okay.
Ultimately, we are responsible for the services and funds that come in and go out.
Mhm.
To the organization. It's ultimately accountability to the taxpayer.
Okay.
There's a couple of ultimate ones in there.
Okay. Let's see if I have anything else want to bring your attention. Service program changes.
Now, just because it's not highlighted, does that mean it's not going to?
No, not necessarily.
Because 70 seems about that's one thing we should be doing.
Monitoring the value of the effective. No, that if it's not highlighted, that just means I didn't have it. No, that was okay.
You didn't have any
Yeah.
qualms about it.
So approve major actions of the organization such as capital expenditures and major service program changes. Okay,
We do that.
I think that's kind of covered at procurement. I was just gonna take that one out anyways. Approve major actions of the organization. And that's kind of, I thought that was redundant. I wrote restate next to that, and I'm not sure, I don't remember what my problem was with that. Just think it had to do with some other policies.
But it doesn't hurt to have that in there if for somebody who's coming in,
No,
they see what all, as opposed to reading in the policies, they see in their duties, who's going to be responsible. So they can see it listed up front.
mhm. I thought the highlighted one was great. I thought that was a keeper.
With,
Evaluation of board performance
yeah.
in yellow. Bob, there's nothing that prohibits the board from evaluating itself, is there?
No, there isn't. Just keep in mind that that creates public records.
Right.
Why could that be bad?
I'm not saying, it's just advice. It creates a public record. Records in and of themselves are not bad or good. What's in them is what can be difficult.
Okay.
So if you want to use them, I mean, they're fine. I mean, just keep in mind that anything that gets written down is a public record until, and has to be retained for as long as those things have to be retained.
Makes sense. Yeah, and this was in here, it actually is a board best practice. Board self-evaluation is a best practice. And one of the things that Meridian had done was part of our accreditation One of the optional things you could be accredited under in terms of standards was a governance excellence standard. And we decided it would be helpful in applying for grants and other things. Plus, it's helpful to us as an organization to go ahead. And so part of our CARF accreditation was governance. And so we added a bunch of governance best practices, and this was one of them. We actually evaluated board meetings. At every board meeting, have a board meeting evaluation survey at the end. Was it well organized? Did you feel like you had enough information ahead of time? Was it relevant?
I think that's great. I'd be happy to do that. Our staff would like the feedback.
And then once a year, the board did do an individual self-evaluation. I feel like I am prepared. I feel like I'm contributing. Is the board meeting its obligations, in your opinion? That kind of a survey. So those are the two kinds of surveys that we did.
So staff would have to create a survey. Okay, so what I did was, let's just go through these. Number one, staff will provide the board with a summary of those tasks, activities, discussions, and actions taken by the board to discharge it. I'm going to rate those each year according to the board's established calendar. So what would that mean practically for us? Number one.
Yeah, that's going to give you one that you know. So this one was one I actually took from a board that I sat on. So basically, you would go through the meeting minutes
For the
whole year and say, did you review the budget? So go those board responsibilities, approving all of the financial transactions, approving major program decisions, and then you could go through and we could say, yes, we document that we've done all of these things. The board approved the strategic plan, the board approved the budget, the board reviewed the budget every month. Those things that were the responsibilities of the board as reflected in the minutes.
It sounds like some things our auditors do also.
Right. And so we actually, I think at some point stopped doing that one. And at the end, we did 2 and 3. These may have been an older version of our.
Okay.
We stopped doing 1 because, yes, a lot of that were internal control things that the auditors looked at.
So can we remove 1?
Yeah.
We'll still do those because we've just been asked for all this stuff from our auditor. And just say 2 and 3?
Yeah. Sure.
It doesn't mean we won't do one. It's just part of the audit. Okay.
Yeah.
I think agenda planning and policy, Rob, I thought that was great. I said good, but Maggie should walk us through this one also and explain what you think this would mean practically for us as well.
So one of the things that we had, and you've done this, is a board calendar every year, right? Mm-hmm. So when do you have to convene a nominating committee? When do you have to convene, an investment committee? When do you have to do all of these tasks that are part of what the board has to do? And we had them on a calendar. The board then reviewed those, and included in that calendar was the kind of like, when are you going to get a draft of this strategic plan? Well, when is there going to be a board retreat relative to strategic planning? When is the first draft of the board plan due? When is your draft budget due? What are the, so we basically, those things then fed the agenda for the board meeting. And then I would meet with the chair and say, is this what, do you want anything else? Have you gotten any feedback from other board members about things they want to be reviewing on the agenda? And that would be then go out as the final agenda. The other thing that we did is every meeting, there were 10 to 15 minutes of every meeting. It usually spilled into 20 or 25 minutes of every meeting because it is what it is, was board development. And that could be an outsider coming to talk about, so we had Barzella one time come to talk about board roles and fundraising, or it could be various and sundry of our divisions and departments coming and presenting on what they did. So it could be administrative divisions saying, here's how we do the procurement process. Here's how we, hire staff. Here's our compliance with all of these HR measures. So whatever kinds of things at every board meeting we had just a brief presentation on something that helped the board understand its role or understand the organization better. And the board also could, and once a year we would do a survey of the board and ask, what are you particularly interested in? So for example, sometimes we'd have board members that had no experience with mental health, only substance use, or vice versa. And then they would ask for some training on, they'd heard about all of this Suboxone or something. What is that and how does it work? So we would invite one of our docs to come in and do a topical presentation on one of those things, but it was part and parcel of every board meeting. And then that would be set as part of the calendar, so we would know who was coming to present when.
Okay, we're not gonna be that organized this year, but we could definitely do a survey.
Board topics, yeah.
Yeah,
Board development topics of interest.
we'll be better this year than last year, though.
I can guarantee that.
But it doesn't have to be something that has to be on the agenda, because I was on the board and, it came to the point where there's a presentation, it just seemed like there was gonna be a presentation, whether it was.
Yeah, and this may not, right, and this may not be, I mean, we have a small enough array of things that are being done, but things like, for example, there's been questions in a couple meetings, well, what is the procurement process? So maybe kind of walking through that would be a good board development activity. We didn't do them at every meeting. We only had 5 topics that were of interest, and now we weren't just going to put somebody up there. But for us, with like 50 different programs, there was, you could rotate through, and it'll take you 3 years to rotate through. Yeah, so it was, and then, and then, so the board, part of the way the board monitored was obviously the reporting that we did. So was there consistently available reporting by me or my staff in areas that the board used to then evaluate organizational and therefore my performance? So that was actually pretty standard too. We had I had a schedule of reports that went to the board every month. Sort of what you've got on the consent agenda, it's that kind of stuff. And some of it was pulled. So we used to attach our financials as a consent agenda item, but then we would do a PowerPoint that did a sort of more graphical representation of the financials, because not everybody on your board understands a balance sheet or, an operating statement. But they can see a picture that says revenue expense or revenue expense.
Okay.
So that's what those reports were. And it was reports, again, remember, we're providing umpteen thousand services. So the reports could be everything from patient satisfaction measures to outcome measures to compliance measures. We had a rotating schedule. And so that may not be really something important, or it may be just a limited thing that you have on the consent agenda. And that's really both 7 and 8. So my monthly report to the board was organized around our strategic plan objectives. Where were we on all of them?
So talk about number 4. Was number 4 the various
Yeah, so the
various
board,
presentations?
the board input, and we scheduled a calendar during the first quarter so that we knew what we were going to be doing the rest of the year.
Well, our cycle, our bylaws put us on a January.
Yeah, ours was.
So by the end of March, we could have the rest of the year mapped
So
out.
we were on a July to June calendar, but for board purposes, because we didn't want to bring in a brand new chair right as budget, right as all the really busy stuff was going to happen. Didn't seem like a good time to have a new chair. So we did the board in January, even though our fiscal year ran July to June, because it just gave that person time to ramp up.
So do we like this one? This policy is the keeper? Mr. Vice Chair, yeah. Okay. So board chair role.
Yeah, I think that may have some statutory things that you
Well,
on. I mean, these are pretty standard.
Yeah. Let me just remember what I wrote, what I'm saying.
Yeah, 2 may not be one that applies that you can apply, just given all the.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember what our bylaws, so I have the bylaws here, but this is about the board chair.
Yeah, and that's where this came from. So again, you can just take whatever the bylaws say and plop it in here for each of these.
Okay, well, we'll just refer to the bylaws.
Yeah, for all of those officers, that's what I would recommend, is just plop whatever's in the bylaws into here.
Yeah, I will say, yeah, so ours is chair, vice chair, and treasurer.
Right.
The
Does not have a
secretary,
treasurer.
I'm the secretary. And I did like, what it said about the secretary, I just kind of, because I'm not sure about, I think it just says I'm the secretary, but it doesn't give me any more jobs in the bylaws. Which is normally I'm okay with that, but if someone expects me to do something,
These are a lot easier to change than bylaws, so I would say put it in policy, not bylaw, if you can.
yeah.
But silent bylaws are much more helpful than noisy ones.
What was it? This shall act as the secretary of the trust. So provide minutes.
Right.
But this kind of gives me more, which is also the documents, which I think is important.
Yeah.
So we can add vice chair and we'll make the language.
Yeah,
reflect the
and you can
bylaws.
just throw the treasurer in there too, because we did not have a treasurer on purpose, and that's a Carter thing.
And what is that? I'm just curious.
Again, you operate as a committee of the whole rather than having individual workers in finance. And so we didn't have a finance committee either, because the financials were distributed and talked about with the entire board every single meeting. Yeah, because you have to have, some of that is also, you just, in order to have a corporation, you have to have a minimal set of officers.
Bob, we're on page 9, board member code of conduct. Once I got into this stuff, I had a lot of questions. Seems like there's, doesn't seem like there's a lot, if I understand the statutes, like there's not a lot we can do to limit conduct, because there's already a lot of limitations on board members with ethics and things like that, and you can't really kick people off the board except the county commission or something. I mean, I might be saying some of these things not wrong, but can you comment on, do you understand my concerns or what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's no harm in setting forth board expectations. Obviously the board code of conduct under the law is going to be governed by the chapter 112 of the Florida statutes, which, we can insert some things about there. But otherwise, there's, the board can impose upon itself other obligations that don't conflict with that, but, they're going to be unenforceable.
Yeah.
But you can certainly say, look, this is what we expect you to do. We expect you to be prepared. We expect you to, not cause distractions. And then if there's an issue, when they come up for reappointment, those issues can be brought to the attention of the Board of County Commissioners, because other than the 5 permanent members, if you will, the permanent positions, the 5 other positions, they're appointed for their term. And if they aren't on the recommendations of the county commissioners, they aren't going to be appointed. They have to be one of the 3. So, that is a little bit of leverage.
So maybe that introductory paragraph needs to be reworded, and maybe rather than a code of conduct, we call it, board member responsibilities, or you can put it into the responsibilities section.
Take the job seriously, don't do anything to embarrass the trust.
Yeah.
So is there anything, Bob, on page 9 that would concern you?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I'd like to, insert a little about the Florida Law Point.
Okay.
And their responsibility, to make sure they file annually, that they keep track of conflicts, and they follow the Sunshine and Public Records Law.
Okay, that's great.
And these were part of, so these came directly from our DNO carrier, Directors and Officers Liability Insurance Carrier. And so that's where they came from, those guys. And this was part of what we built into board orientation to these expectations. So we went over all of that when new board members came on.
Okay.
I mean, even the Board of County Commissioners is free to establish its own, rules of conduct for meetings. So, there's no reason you can't do the same thing. And it's to the extent that, these are expectations, they're fine. I don't think that, the board could eject one of their own. They might be able to censor them though. So that's all unknown to me because I haven't seen that sort of vituperativeness at that level
Okay.
so far.
So then I think the whole conflict of interest thing needs to go because it's the different, the definition is.
You got a code in the policies and stuff, maybe.
So that's got to be different because the conflict of interest is different, very differently defined for this organization than it would have been for Meridian. So I would just say strike everything that you got from us in regard to conflict of interest.
Yeah, Bob,
Conflict of interest governed by state law.
yes.
So,
You only recommend, so in the whole conflict of interest section, I highlighted with a big question mark.
That needs, I think he was nodding when I say that should go and be replaced by whatever's in statute. Yes?
you can see wise, please stuff in the back of your head. So you can see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can put together a couple of paragraphs
Yeah.
that will be sufficient. The problem, of course, with the state conflict of interest law is it's not user friendly and it's not intuitive.
It's not intuitive.
That's what I gathered that the first time I tried to abstain.
Mhm. Yeah. It's almost case by case, it seems like.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that all goes.
Well, it's consistent about if you gain financial, then you have a conflict.
Yeah, and then ours was pretty much that too, but there were people on our board who might have had one that they needed to just declare. Like we had a member who worked at the VA. So what does that mean? Yeah, so we just declared those relationships at the beginning of the year, but I just think Bob is right, just write a couple paragraphs. And then attendance, again, this board member code of conduct piece on attendance isn't relevant to this. What had happened with us was boards never like to vote people off the island, and we had members that didn't show up. So instead of having to have a board vote to kick somebody off for not coming, we just made it a bylaw item that said if you miss more than 5 meetings a year, you're done. Bye. Thank you for your service.
Do we have attendance for Bob?
Yeah, we do. I was gonna ask about that.
So then, yeah, you can put it, and if you're, you can do it, you can add it to that other section that had all of the duties, and responsibilities instead of having it be a separate thing. I don't know why it was a separate thing here, probably because I looked at it, didn't catch it.
So Bob, how is the attendance thing in our bylaws? How is that enforceable? Because this makes
really
it sound like if
isn't.
you miss 3 meetings or consecutive or 5 without a cause.
What you can do is
It's appropriate.
if,
Okay, you request the county commission to remove them. I see what it says. Okay.
yeah, I mean, you could do that, and then the board of county commissioners would make a recommendation to the governor.
Okay.
Or if it's one of the 5 permanent members, exert some political pressure. If it's a, member of the county commission, get another member of the county commission to show up. Because obviously you need to make sure that you have enough board members to do the business of the trust. And if someone just, for whatever reason, is not showing up and is not unwilling to resign and allow someone else to be appointed, then, what the governor grants, the governor can take it away.
So, and by the way, getting back to conflict of interest, you did write 3, or somebody did, I'm assuming it was you wrote 3 pretty simple paragraphs in the bylaws. I don't know if those are sufficient, but that might be a good starting place.
Okay, the bylaws, I'll remind you, that the bylaws were largely pirated from other children's trusts to give the trust something to start with. So they're only as permanent as your operations and vision allow them to be.
Okay,
Because we were required to do it under setting up the district.
so we might want to look at, I think I have to look at the bylaws. We can add some stuff in there. Okay, board committee principles.
And again, these are drafted out of that whole notion, the board operate as a committee of the whole rather than having lots of specialized. So committees are always, other than executive, which frankly only met if I had something that had to get done really fast and I didn't have time for the next board meeting. They met to do that. They met to do my evaluation, and they met with the auditors in twice a year as the audit committee. So the principles are designed to really reinforce the notion that the committees are recommending bodies. They don't have authority to implement anything without the further approval of the board. So they may be overly strong for your liking in some of that regard, but that's where that comes from.
So the bylaws don't have any provision for committees either. It's a general ad hoc committee.
Yep.
And it doesn't have any provision that I can tell of for an executive committee.
Ours doesn't.
I don't think so. Let me look. I could be wrong.
Executive, I mean, the only way we use the executive committee / audit committee is, like I said, if we suddenly had some major expenditure that was outside my spending limits, like an HVAC system went out.
Mhm.
And it wasn't in the approved capital plan because we didn't anticipate it going out, and those could be run like $50,000 expenditures, then I would just call the executive committee and we'd say, we don't really have a choice. It's Florida. But we'd get their blessing, and then that would be on the agenda for the following board meeting to ratify the decision of the executive committee. And then, like I said, they served as the audit committee, and our process for the audit is always that somewhere around May, they met with the auditors, and they met with them separate from staff so that they had an opportunity to hear or share any concerns. And then after the audit, they would present the findings of the audit to the audit committee. Again, staff was excused, and that they had the opportunity to talk with the auditors independent of staff around any issues or concerns. And that's also a best governance practice to ensure impartiality of the auditors. I don't know how that works in a governmental entity.
That volunteers would
And their report is great.
send for this grade or call reason they would send out, they would ask the commission if they would, more than other people on the board, who are there any issues?
Are there any concerns that you have? So it's an opportunity outside the presence of the management team
They send an email.
for the board to share any concerns with the auditors that they then would look at as part of their audit process. And then at the end, we had 2 parts to that. At the end, we had a series of questions that the board is required to ask of the auditors to ensure their independence, to ensure that nobody had tried to influence them. There was a whole series of questions. And then again, staff were asked to leave, and the auditors could share any concerns, or the board could ask any questions they didn't want to ask in the presence of staff. So which ensured that, because the board had only 2, other than the CEO, the board hires the center attorney and the organizational attorney and the organizational auditor. And so technically the auditors and the attorney report to the board, not the CEO. And so having that ability to have that communication is again considered a board best practice.
I think they do that just, as a.
Yeah, most audit firms have picked that up and actually like that. So yeah, it was not something that our auditors went, ah.
Library.
They do that. Yeah. So
So I had a question on number 4. We don't have any executive committee or bylaws as far as I can tell. So we can add one. Or do we need one? Do we need an executive committee?
Is there any likelihood that something would come up needing board approval in between? And I don't know, Bob, this is also an area for you, is is there any way to do anything absent a full board in terms of approval of anything? Because if not, then there's really, the only thing you might want an executive committee for is to do his eval.
The executive, there, if a question comes up about the executive director, it was what we approved, and it goes through the chair.
Okay.
So, and they have the ability, and the chair then seeks counsel, from whoever. And it's-
So if you don't need that, then you don't need that.
An audit committee, we do the full board, that's after the leave.
Yeah, I mean, it works either way. We ended up doing an audit committee because usually by the time we didn't always have a board meeting scheduled from between the time the audit was done, and we had to have it to the counties and the state by the end of December. And so the timing never worked with our board meetings.
there was the chair would meet with the audit firm and the executive director, for the committee. And they would have a meeting.
I think it's whatever works, you know.
It was not a committee, it was just one of
The
the.
chair and the, okay, it's the duty of the chair.
So then you have to add that to the role and responsibility of the chair.
Okay. Good point. It sounds like that's how we prefer to do it in this case.
I'm fine either way. I mean,
Okay, and then, so I think that handles number 4. Or part of number 4, about the audit committee.
well, it says, yeah, actually, if you don't have an executive and you don't have one, the whole 4 can go. Because it's consistent with its bylaws, so.
And what about, it looks like number 3 can go?
Yes.
Okay.
Unless there's an executive.
Right.
Okay, so then the last one is we can convene a nominating committee, is how we want to handle, because in January, we're supposed to pick new officers.
And ours was an ad hoc committee. It was sort of ad hoc. I mean, people volunteered and they knew that they could be called to convene whenever we either had a vacancy that we needed to fill or to do a slate.
So the nominating committee for us would only be for the officers, right? So they meet once a year and they select the group, so.
And that's where we would have they'd have the information about attendance. They would have, you know, it's a little, we have more latitude, obviously, around who you put in what seat.
Well, for officers, I think you can do.
Yeah, for officers, we can, right. But we have more to go on, is what I'm saying in terms of making some choices, so.
Okay, so I do have a question then, because we'll have to address this probably at the next board meeting. Do we want to ask for a nominating committee to nominate officers? Because if we keep it in this policy, then. Okay, well, because we didn't do that last time. I think it was just 2, I would say 2. Usually they volunteer because then they know they won't nominate themselves.
I've always volunteered
You
for
might wanna be
nominating committees. If I've got any whiff that I might be nominated for something, I would volunteer for that nominating committee in a heartbeat.
2 years ago.
Yeah, 2, we do have a term limit, so 2
Yeah.
years, so maybe you would be good to be on it then.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I didn't have any questions about any of the others, I thought.
Until we get to the delegation to the CEO or executive director.
Board management delegation, unity of control, accountability of the executive director, maybe. Did you want to talk through some of those or?
So a lot of this is just protection of the organization. So there are times when boards can get very pushy and bossy with people who are not their employee, which is him. And so this was just a clear prohibition that the only person we could boss around was the CEO. The only person the board could boss around was me. And that took a decision by everybody. So if there was a discussion about something and it didn't get passed, that could not be enforced And then we went through a time when we had certain board members who were driving some of our staff just crazy with information requests, action requests. And so this came out of wanting to be clear that really the board is governance. They don't dig into operational things on a day-to-day basis, and that staff, really shouldn't be constantly tasked with things.
We were on the commission, we were allowed to call.
We were allowed to, anybody on my team, the board responded, but they couldn't give them a directive. They couldn't order them to do something.
Right.
They could call and get information, but it's a way of saying don't abuse the privilege.
Right.
And then obviously,
Board too.
Mhm. ends policies and strategic plan, you would have to replace that with, the four, whatever. Like I said, ours was just structured around that strategic planning document. And again, you have the executive committee reviewing the CEO performance. I don't know how we've set that up to review.
Well, we didn't, I have that, did I write that in here to put that in?
But that maybe number 4 is, you may want to review how that's done, because it does say executive committee, and so you need to kind of see how you want
Okay, which one, number
to. I'm
4
on
right
number
here?
4.
This one?
No, I'm on the, which one are you in? Accountability.
I'm on
of this-
page 15,
I'm on 14.
or 14.
I was on 14 too.
Accountability of the executive director. You have that yellow highlight on page
Yeah.
14, and then number 4 talks about your performance being reviewed by the executive committee. So you're gonna have to we need to figure out how that's gonna be.
Well, last year, what we did, and I think we passed an item, not a policy, was
Did we do a survey?
I did a self-evaluation based on my job description in January. And then you were sent that with a survey.
Right.
To rate the categories, and then it was discussed in February. That's my anniversary date. That's my.
Yeah. So that process may be what you want to
Okay.
outline there.
Or if we want a different, we talked about, that was good.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of off for fiscal year. Do we ever want to get on the fiscal year schedule? I don't know. It's up to you guys. I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
The evaluation on the letter board, it was similar. One
The
goal.
anniversary day, so okay, that's fine.
It was a couple months after,
Yeah, mine had to be,
but it was tied to the fiscal year, and then,
right.
the fiscal year starts in October,
Mhm.
and then the evaluation goes on, shortly thereafter, so it may be close to the February, because that's usually when, the evaluation process is done.
Okay, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, mine was not anniversary tied, so because it was after they had the year-end financials from then they'd convene and the executive committee would do it. I've seen it done 50 different ways in different places. As long as there's a process and it's articulated, I think we're good.
Well, we're substantially done. Because when we get into some of the budgeting and other stuff, that'll cover later meetings, so we're almost done. So I think my highlighted on page 14 was just the language and end policies and all that. So what I suggested we change that to.
Well, the policy you got, you got your guidelines,
Yeah, we don't want to use that word, but I think.
Yeah, well, it's a Carver terminology. So I think what you want to do is your organizational goals
Okay,
and.
goals and objectives.
Yeah,
Okay.
goals and objectives, and then you can get rid of the via. This pen doesn't want to work on inky places. I'm not interested. Thank you. But see, that's fine.
So we do have goals and strategies.
Right, so
What
that's
we don't have is specific targets, so. Well, we're coming up, so results-based accountability, you can do that, but it kind of allows for multiple solutions to similar problems and have everyone, it's actually to avoid coming up with a huge strategic plan and allow for as much flexibility as possible. So basically you have problems and identified strategies, and then organizations are responsible for what they do, right? So we do this, and here's how we measure it, and we think that would contribute to fixing whatever the problem is, let's say reading. well, we do this and here's our measures and we think that can, and so you can't ever say for certain the degree in each program, but if everyone does what they're supposed to do, eventually you should see some improvement. So what we're missing is things like the kids we serve, we'd like to see only 50% of them be behind grade levels.
You just hired somebody who's gonna be looking for this.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, we need to, that's where we need to concentrate. Because as far as I'm concerned, that's one of the most important aspects of this whole thing.
Well, I just use reading as an example. What I'm talking was the targets. Yeah. So Bonnie can, I mean, she can recommend targets, but that'll ultimately be up to.
Well,
us
yeah, the
recommending.
baseline, we've got the baseline.
Yeah.
information, So what we should see is improvement.
The other thing is when it comes to like these after school and summer program seats versus everything else, are we targeting a certain number of kids we want to get the programs versus all that's, there's no agreement. I guess part of that's my fault, but,
Well,
so
I think
for
we got, I
staff,
think you're,
we're not sure what we're doing.
let's kind of give yourself a little credit, we've got, I was blown away by all the stuff that you guys presented yesterday. It was phenomenal data. So start, you've got baseline now, and you've got some ideas of what's going on. So I think what I think we need to get to is you now set program priorities for funding for this next year.
Mhm.
So if you look at those, and once you decide what you've funded, which needles are going to move, and do you move them?
Well, it'd be interesting, of course, you can find out, were those 1,125 new people in after school program? Or were they
People who have
something
not been
else?
previously.
If we did the baseline, it'd be what it was before.
Right.
Did this really avail an opportunity to the children that they didn't have?
It was supposed to be. That's how we wrote it.
So your baseline actually be year four, so if you got 1,125, 25,000 children, whatever the number is, that's pretty impressive.
Mm-hmm. If those are 1,100
It's pretty
receipts.
impressive no matter what.
Yeah, it was. So, yeah.
Just to give them the opportunity to learn better.
Yeah.
Right.
The difference between,
Yeah.
just the ones that don't have it, actually have it, have the good experience.
Okay.
Even
All right.
food is great.
But how many bag lunches have we seen thrown away at every school you've ever attended, right?
Just,
So I think what we want to say here is, I would, again, this is a policy and the reason the way we worded it is because I didn't want the policy to commit to a particular reading level, or it was
Mhm.
what are we trying to achieve this
I'm with you.
year?
I went off on a tangent, my bad.
No, it was good, but I think we're gonna have, I think that may also be something you want to see what other children's councils do, is what kind of metrics do they hold the CEO responsible for at the end of the year? The more mature ones, with the notion that we're not there yet. We're working our way
Well,
there.
actually, Eli Broward does exactly what I did. That's what I got to do.
Oh, and that's what my board did, is they circulated. I did same thing. I did here's what I think I've achieved this year. And then there was a survey that went to every board member and they filled it out. And then
That's what the county.
Okay. On
we're not
page,
reinventing a wheel.
no. So on page 15, number 1,
Yeah.
that is pretty, now that's going to take, the board's going to have to do some work there. And that,
I don't think I don't think that we.
Yeah.
I
You don't
don't
wanna
think
do
that's,
that.
I don't think that's fair to say a specified result, specified recipients, specified cost.
Right,
Make
because
it
you're changing all of those. So the notion was, we have a strategic plan. Part of our strategic plan is we were going to serve at least the same number of people we served the year before. Or we were going to start, we were going to be able to grow programs to serve X more people in this particular kind of program, right? And specified, we had target populations that we were supposed to be serving. And so then the specified cost is at staying within your budget, basically, which is the cost of providing the care that you've committed to provide to the people you've committed to providing it to within the budget that's been approved. The idea being, you know, that old statement about nothing is a bigger value statement than your budget, right? So if you said you're going to spend this and not this for these programs, did you live up to that?
So I think.
So you can, that's wording again, that's very Carterish. And so you can just want to say that develop policies to achieve
And you can.
prioritize results
You can tailor it to children's trust.
and the RBA
Implement.
and the results-based accountability model.
That you can say instruct to utilize and scrutinize performance measures.
To achieve specified performance measures, is
But
specified wrong, or I like the word specified myself.
Yeah, I want.
But you don't like that?
I don't like it because
Okay.
it could hurt you. We're just improvement. You know, what we're looking for is to put our children in, and that's going to take time. You know, it's you know, in 10 years, if this works as it should, the results will be, you know, probably much greater at the end than the beginning.
So how about to achieve targeted results? Because that is the whole framework of results-based accountability, and you are going to be measuring. It is incremental, but it's so maybe instead of specified, targeted.
To target results or specified for targeted.
I would just say put a period after targeted results and get rid of the rest of it.
Okay.
But we might want to put in the performance measure. So we know that, you know, because we all think that that's important.
Results and performance measures.
Targeted results through measuring performance,
Yeah, there you go.
measuring program
And then
performance.
specified recipients are going to be children and families.
Yeah, so you don't need to say that because that's in the purpose of the organization.
And specified cost, that's your budget.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I only highlighted number 5 because I think we already have a signature policy. And so I would just keep that.
You have that.
Yeah.
$50,000.
Or whatever the board says.
Right.
Yeah, those were really important to me when I didn't want to have to run out to Swanee County or Hamilton County to get a signature on a document. Once the board approved something, there was actually, when the county required us to submit it every year as our bylaws and a delegation of authority resolution to me, so I could sign that stuff.
So I think once we get through page 18, public presentation, we're pretty much done. The rest of it's covered in other meetings.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check.
So once you stopping where, once we
Page
get to,
18, public representation. There is some human resource, so we could cover, I guess, human resources. We have some separate human resource policies.
and you were okay with all those? I don't see much of anything.
Well, I don't look at human resources.
No, I'm talking the 15, 16.
I think I quit after 15. I think I said, oh God, my brain is dry. Sorry about that. It was like, I should have not prepared, but I don't think I saw anything that really, my only input would be if Bob saw something that or
Yeah, so once we get to those executive limitation policies, the ones that start middle, sort of third of the way down on 16, that's where all the double negative language starts to pile in. So you may just want, for ease of to just make it plainer English. So instead of accordingly, she shall not fail, she shall not fail, is shall, basically just shall submit the required, and it's yeah.
okay.
You just flip the wording and all, and you're gonna have that through any of those executive limitation policies you adopt are gonna have to get flipped.
Okay.
Okay, why do we need the monitoring?
You're
Let me read what it says.
on page 15.
Because we're going to evaluate your performance.
Where are you?
Yeah.
This specifies how it's to be done,
Okay, we've already determined.
right? So you can, yeah, this is all Carter stuff, so you can get rid of it if you don't, if it's not relevant, just get rid of it.
Okay.
And the executive limitation policy, that's determined already, you know?
No, these are the thou shalt or the,
No, but don't we already have that? We have to have that. You have to have insurance for, or we cover as a governmental entity. Do you need that?
Okay, I'm not following you. 16, which part?
Limitation policy.
Well, this is just a whole list of things I shall or shall not do, right?
yeah, it's just a whole bunch of, it's a whole string. If you look at the table of contents, Lee, there's all kinds of things. Some of them which don't even apply, like services and client rights, those kinds of things don't apply to this. This was, but there are some that are good, like communication and counsel to the board. We should always keep the board informed and, you know. My first board chair said to me, I don't look good in black and white stripes, and I don't go to jail alone. So, my only response was, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so we can rework these.
Yeah, you just have, some may not apply, and some, you know, some are very specific to.
Like we don't do an IRS 990, of course, that's in financial conditions.
Right, so there's all kinds of things that will not apply at all to the trust that you just need to get rid of, and then all you have to do is just flip those negative statements around.
So are you gonna go through and wordsmith communication, counsel to board?
Yes.
Planning, public relations?
Yeah, we'll just flip back and if anything that doesn't make sense, we'll just make it. But I think it's all good, public representation, I think it's all good. I mean, obviously, we were more than just mental health and substance abuse.
Right, exactly, you have to change all of that.
And we just went over the financial condition.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have a separate next meeting, we'll go through we're gonna get our accountants to weigh in on some of
And
that.
he left those in here, but when I did the table of contents overview, I had said you're gonna have to use whatever is required.
So just leave those out.
And you've already got some like competitive procurement. We did that last meeting. So some of that's already investment we talked about already. So all of that's just gonna have to go.
Reserve funds.
Right, all of that will be.
The only thing we may want to just glance over quickly is HR and see if there's anything we don't have. Page 30. I'm out, yes, and we are well within time.
And just
We're on the
those-
Lee Dickinson School of Fast Board meeting,
Just-
207.
and,
We're 53 minutes ahead of schedule.
And just to give you that, those, the investment guidelines that are in here are fairly recent, and they're ones that the board did in conjunction with an investment counselor. So they're actually fairly decent. They're focused on liquidity, you know, it's the same kind of,
Okay.
so. All right, HR. So these are all, again, gonna be,
I think we have a lot of
Did we go
these.
through all that, Norm, with the?
Well, yeah. So we have,
Yeah.
we have some HR policies, which are pre-employment, like how we hire people. That we have to have a pay classification. And then once they're hired, our policy is the employee handbook, which the board approves. So let me do this, let me give these to Katie and we'll talk through these and see. I think
some of these are things that we had federal funds, so we had to do certain things because federal funding required them, so, you know.
and we might want to get federal funds too, so maybe we should keep some of these in there, but they might be covered in our handbook.
Yeah.
Staff treatment, that's always good.
Yeah, and
But I
again,
think
you
if
may
some of
have a
these are covered
lot
in
of,
the handbook.
if it's covered in the handbook, wouldn't that just be lovely if we
The
could,
golden rule is
you didn't
good.
have to specify what that meant, but it would be lovely.
Okay, so we'll rework some of these. But I don't plan on, from here on out, we don't really plan on presenting this board till January
That's
workshop.
fine, until we see a edited, fully edited version. We
Yeah.
probably should not.
The other stuff we had to do, so that was good feedback. And then Bob, we'll give you plenty of chance to review these, okay? Once we rewrite them. You hear what I said?
He's looking.
Okay.
Oh, the other one that is in here that may or may not at any point is fundraising, and I don't know if you're even allowed to do that.
We can raise funds, we just have to get everything appropriated.
So the fundraising, if they're in here, and I'm not sure what those. Oh, the board member, I didn't include in here, the background screening was not one I raised because part of that had to do with a lot of our requirements under DCF, but also the board had to, because we did opiate treatment, we had a methadone clinic, our board had to be fingerprinted and run through. But that may not be something you ever need to think about, but if you ever do a methadone clinic.
Well, sometimes I feel like my coffee is like my daily dose of methadone. I feel like I'm lining up the coffee shop, ready to get my shot before I can get going for the day.
And then so the
I hate to say
fundraising,
that, but
the one that I also didn't highlight is the fundraising activities by board members.
Right.
Those standards came out of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. So they were not ours. They were done by people who actually do it for a living. But they may be old now, so it may be good to hit up somebody with the development department that's like our person and ask for those are still. So that's it.
anything else you want to talk about?
I want to talk to you for a few minutes. We have a couple extra.
Bob, we're going to write these up and send it to you so you can have appropriate time to review, okay?
Okay,
Thanks for sitting in. Does someone want to adjourn? Chair, would you like to
If
adjourn?
we have no further business, we're adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And,
Always a pleasure, Lee.
Liz, while I remember, since I'm looking at Lee, can you add him to the invites for those commission meetings? And if he can come, great. If you can't, no big deal, but I'm helpful,
I
so.
have to say, going to the election county commission, I always had pleasure. No matter who was on the commission, that one I never minded.
Well, try